Well, kia ora tātou. My name's Angie Tangaere. I'm Ngāti Parau, but I was born and bred in South Auckland, raising my sons with my husband in South Auckland. I'm a social entrepreneur at the Southern Initiative. It's a really exciting opportunity to be able to work at the TSI because we've got the remit around thinking about innovation for better social and economic outcomes for whānau in South Auckland. And that's really exciting because it lets us think about and test new ways of doing things for better outcomes. So I love the idea of putting the human experience at the centre of what you're doing and the centre of the way that you're working. I love the way that there was a bias to action. I love the way that you could make it very, very tactile and kinesthetic. But the feedback from our families here in South Auckland was often they don't see themselves in the processes or in the institutions that are working for them. For example, sometimes they don't go into libraries because they don't see anybody like them inside the library and they can't see any cultural anchors. And so I started to think about, well, how do we create a way of working with whānau here where they can see themselves inside of the process. More than that, they could lead the process, they'd be empowered by the process, and the process itself would add value. So that it's not about the process creating a whole bunch of prototypes as much as it is about the process actually being the vehicle to empower people and upskill them and build their capability and us learn at the same time inside of the process. So I started to think about that, and that's when I started to think about how might we drive a culturally responsive and appropriate practice that sits alongside the methodology. So the methodology, the co-design methodology is fairly sound, frame, explore, ideate, test. That all makes sense. It's the way that we're engaging with communities and whānau, the way that we're doing that's of most interest to me. So the way that we're doing each of those activities. So it becomes a question of what practice needs to evolve alongside this, so that it doesn't become another process that families in South Auckland don't see themselves in or aren't empowered within. I started to think about that, and I started to use a Tikanga framework, and that's largely based on kaupapa Māori research principles and methodologies. It's not exhaustive, it will evolve, but we started to think about how we deploy each of those tikanga principles in a way that would empower whānau inside of the design process. And then we started to break it down and describe what each of those principles would mean in practice. And so we've used manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, tino rangatiratanga, mana and ako as beginning principles. And we use those to think about every time we're engaging with whānau and as we're working through the process, are we being true to those key principles, and how are we demonstrating those key principles inside of the process with whānau? And that's what's developing the practice. So the difference for us would be when you're considering how you involve individuals in the process, then you design the process for that. And deploying these or implementing these principles inside of a design process, now what you're having to do is accommodate a whānau inside of the process. So you're not just trying to get one adult to workshops, you might be getting 2 adults and 3 kids, or you might be getting a mum, a granddad or a nana, an auntie and some kids. And so you're needing to develop and engage in a different way. Firstly, whānau define who their whānau is, and we follow that lead, is for whānau to be able to set the rules of engagement for themselves. So that means literally at the start of the process we work through a conversation with whānau where they tell us what they need to be able to participate in the process for themselves and for the whānau. And so, for example, one of the requirements in the early years, the challenge was they wanted childcare, so the children could be inside of the process with them. And we had to work around the logistics of children being involved in the process and making sure they were cared for well within the process. So that's just one example. But it's about whānau setting those rules of engagement, and so that's the start of whānau having power and control in the process itself. And we've engaged families who are actively avoiding other agencies, and not only have we engaged them, but we've been able to retain them throughout the process, and they've invited other families in. And so we've got, for one of our projects, we've got something like 120% retention rate because they've invited other whānau in. And agencies have asked us, how have you done that? And one of the critical things that's important in retaining whānau is that we, at the start of the process, we went through a process of whakawhanaungatanga with them, and we built trust with them at the start of the process without talking about the work. Now that's a hard thing to do because there usually aren't any KPIs around you having a cup of tea and sitting down with people and understanding who they are and them understanding who you are. But it's critical to be able to have a platform of trust and relationship that you can continue to then work on. So that's one of the critical things that we did at the start of the process, which paid off in terms of being able to work well with whānau on a long-term basis. The other thing is that we think once the relationship is initiated, it is not for the length of that project. It's not for the lifetime of that project. So, and this is a new way of thinking and working, is that relationship is then ongoing and lasting and sustaining. So we're working with people contacting us still in a project we did 3 years ago because it's authentic relationships with whānau. And so that's a hard thing to think about for some people because they just see the interaction with communities and whānau for the longevity of the project, and that's the end of that. We're saying that we need to develop authentic, genuine relationships with whānau, and that will be ongoing because now you're connected. There are some challenges around that in terms of a kind of often a blurring between who I am as a public servant and who I am to those families and to the project. And if we are serious about working in a truly participatory way where citizens and residents are leading this work, or where whānau are leading in this work, then that's just something we're going to have to grapple with. So for an example is one of the groups started a Facebook page or Facebook close group, and they wanted to invite us, and one of our colleagues said, I think I'll make a work Facebook page. And then I said, well, I can see the merit in that, but I also can't authentically say who I am and work in this way and then have a Facebook page that is sanitised. So I went in as who I am, and with all my crazy whānau in tow on my page, which is fine because families can't sanitise their life. And there were some things that were getting posted that did worry me, and one of the learnings was actually the group self-regulated that. I didn't need to. But I've had hard conversations with whānau and with community members where I've had to say there might be times and points within the process where if I'm really worried about someone or somebody's safety, I'm going to have to talk to you about that, and I'm going to try to support you to get some help there, which people should do anyway, right? But it's very clear, I'm very clear about what my responsibilities are in terms of being a public servant. I was working with a group for a year, they didn't even know I worked for council. Even though I would say that, and they would say, oh, that's Angie, and she lives in Papakura, and she's got 2 kids. And that's our connection. And so about a year later, they were like, oh, do you work for council? And I was like, yeah, I work for council. So the strength of the relationship was who I am and who I bring to the process, which is also who I am and who I bring to my job. But the point is, for us to work well in this way, you really need to bring all of you. And being a public servant is part of that for me at the moment. But I bring all of who I am to this, my worldview, my values, all of that to the process. So how do we authentically and genuinely share power and control with families in the process? This is not about having a co-design methodology where whānau or people are passive participants in parts of the process. They should be able to be empowered and lead right throughout the process. If we're able to understand how we truly share power and control, I think we'll be able to create or support much better outcomes for families. Because at the moment, the way we're geared to work is that we are driven by organisational performance measures and targets, or KPIs, and the processes are often designed and driven by that, and they may not line up to the aspirations of whānau, or even the requirements or needs of whānau. So if we can put whānau at the centre of designing what they need in a local context, and then be able to do it for themselves, I think that there's potential for transformation for us in the South. This is particularly why we have mana and tino rangatiratanga as two of the key principles. So what mana does for us is it starts to recognise whānau as being experts in their own right. So what we've got at the moment is lots of people who are trained to tell other people what to do and what's best for them, and across lots of disciplines. And often whānau are not acknowledged inside of those services or processes as having, as being able to know what's best for them, and are not empowered to lead what they need to achieve their aspirations. Often they're passive recipients of something, of a service, of a product. So for me, the principle of mana is about us acknowledging that whānau have a whole wealth of talent and skill and strength and resilience that they bring to the table, and we need to start acknowledging them as experts in their own right, so that we can balance the level of power control, the fulcrum of power control in these processes. And so what I like to do in that respect is I often tilt the fulcrum of power and control in favour of whānau. And I do that because for many of our whānau here in South Auckland who are experiencing a high level of inequity for lots of reasons, it's not enough to bring it up to be level. They need to be, they really need to be lifted up inside of the process, and then it will balance out. An example of that is when we're working through the co-design process, if we're doing this, the whānau-centred practice well, we're working intentionally and intensively with whānau so that they understand the design process and why we're doing certain things, and we're building their skill in it, so that when they come into workshops with professionals or practitioners, often they know more than the practitioners in the room. And so that's kind of skewing the power and control in their favour, and that's because in most instances, whenever they come into the room of professionals, they will not have more knowledge or experience and expertise than those experts in the room, and so the powers will always be tilted in favour of the professionals, and by nature of also where the meetings are and the structure of the meetings and the process. So that's critical because it builds up their confidence around the process, but it's also building their skill. And one of the things that we're really interested in here at TSI in terms of early years investment is how we build the capability of our parents or our adults, so that they can demonstrate executive functioning for their children. So that's part of the way that we engage with whānau. And tino rangatiratanga, what we use in terms of that is that whānau determine how and when they will participate, but we also intentionally look across the process and start to think about where within the process do whānau actually have decision-making power. Because you can create a whole lot of processes for whānau and with whānau where they actually don't have any decision-making ability inside of the process. It's still the organisation or the institution making the decisions. So what we do is we intentionally build decision-making points in the process so that whānau, they tell us where are we going to go from here, or they make the decision on certain priorities within the process. Otherwise we're just doing the same old thing that we would usually do, which is create a process and then the institution take that information, prioritise it, or use it in a way that we would normally use it. And when you're experiencing inequity, you quite often do not have a voice in the kinds of systems that are in place in society. An example of that in Papakura is, despite having the highest Māori population per capita in Auckland, and despite having a large youthful population, when we were analysing the feedback received through council processes, Māori and young people are the most underrepresented voice. So they're not engaging or we're not able to engage them in the process that we have. So one of the things we think about is, how do we hear that unheard voice? Whānau who are getting on with life and trying to do the best they can, but may not have the opportunity to contribute to work or to collaborating with us to think about what we can do together for local fit for purpose solutions for whānau. So we recruit through our own social networks to do that and look for people who might not usually be involved in council process, and some that might. And then there is a process of meeting, understanding their whakapapa, them understanding ours, how we connect, understanding what the work is geared to achieve. So that is not one cup of tea, right? That's an ongoing process which is time intensive, and that's the investment that we need to have if you want this work to work. If you want to be able to work in this way with whānau, is that's the thing. You need the people with the right skill, and you need time to be able to do that. But this is kind of when it starts to get blurred, because when you do it well, I'm meeting with people to understand who are they, and they're going to understand who am I. And so this is where people start to get a blurring of, I'm Angie from council to that's Angie, she's Ngāti Porou, she's got 2 children. So that process of understanding their whakapapa, sometimes we've had people that just talk about their life to you. And so that connection means they don't see you as working for an organisation, they just see you who you are. And the other thing is, we can get to know people, and then we get to talk about the work if they trust us. And if they don't want to be involved, that's fine too. It's all good, So it's whakawhanaungatanga with an intent to connect. It's not whakawhanaungatanga with an intent to recruit people. So the intention is, I really just, who are you and who are you? Who am I? Might we work together? And if not, it's all good. We're so used to quick and dirty consultation and quick and dirty engagement. We're only connecting with people for a specific purpose. Give me your annual plan feedback. Give me your local board plan feedback. Give me your Auckland plan feedback. See you later. We can't continue to work like that. It's not conducive to transformational outcomes. It's just so humbling to hear when it's worked well, how whānau describe it. And I don't say this lightly, some whānau have said it's been transformational for them. It's been a turning point in their life for some. And that, I think, is because what they talk about is they feel empowered in a process, and they feel that they're valued, and they get a sense of self-confidence, and that leads to other really positive outcomes. Some of the outcomes that we've seen being achieved through the process are, like I say, an increase in people's self-efficacy, their self-belief, their self-confidence, and that's led to some of them getting jobs or going onto the board of trustees at their children's school, which they were not confident to do before. Also, the peer-to-peer social connectedness, social cohesion. So this brings together a whole bunch of people who might not know each other and they're in the same community. And what they talk about, some of them have said that they'd felt quite socially isolated before that, but now they have a network of friends. Yeah. So that's really great, and they have a network of friends that support each other, that goes beyond the project. So there are relationships and friendships that form inside of these processes that go beyond that, which is really cool. We're building social capital at a community level that can benefit whānau, like they now have networks and information about what's happening in their community that can benefit them that they didn't have before, like jobs. I heard about a teacher aid job at the school, are you interested in that? Oh yeah, I might be able to do that. So that kind of social capital that people don't have. What we want to go from is kind of a downward spiral of social isolation to a self-reinforcing cycle of social capital, of peer-to-peer support and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting, because what whānau talked to us about was that I don't know anybody, I don't know my neighbours, I don't know what's happening, I feel isolated, I don't know anyone, and it kind of spirals down to you feel quite lonely and isolated. But what we can create and what we know has happened for our whānau is, I know some people, they told me about what's happening at the park. I met more people, they told me what's happening at the library. I went to the library with my friends because I didn't want to go by myself. And then that is just a positive self-fulfilling kind of cycle where people are learning more about their community and what's on offer based on the strength of the relationships that they have. So that's been coming out. And there's been some economic outcomes which I never would have foreseen through the process. That wasn't what it was geared for, from employment to even some of the projects attracting investment. Yeah, so all of these great outcomes just by virtue of how you engage and how you're creating the space for whānau to come in and feel empowered, valued, and build their capability and their skill at the same time as we're learning, building our capability, etc. And some of this stuff is it's pioneering, it's cutting edge stuff, and it's kind of on the edge, and if we want to have a transformational agenda, it has to be. And so the risk on the edge is greater, and we just need to manage that. So my approach is that I always talk to whānau about this being a new way of working, and why we want to work this way and what the benefits could be, and that we're going to make mistakes, and I'm upfront about that, because this is about letting go of an expert model, and we've made mistakes, but I think because we were upfront and honest, they were gracious in their forgiveness, and if we really want to grapple with some of our most wicked problems here, then it's going to take us to do something radically different in part. And that's not to the detriment of people's well-being or their safety, but we've really got to be brave and courageous in trying some new things to be able to understand what it's going to take to create better outcomes. So one of them, I like this one because it's kind of co-design meets whānau-centred. And you know how we're usually using Sharpies on post-its when we're doing the design work, and that's the kind of that's the golden rule, isn't it? When you're working with the post-its, you've got to use Sharpie. Well, we did that with some kids in the room, and the kids drew on their own clothes, got hold of the Sharpies and drew on their own clothes. So mistake number one was understanding the logistics of things like Sharpies, not because I'd never thought about that. Knives, scissors, this kind of stuff makes sense, right? not Sharpies. And so that was mistake number one. So that rule was, you've got to make adults responsible for their Sharpie. Like, it's literally, you're in charge of your Sharpie. And don't put it down while you go to get a cup of coffee, because a 2-year-old's going to grab that and draw on their clothes. So that wasn't too flash. One of the more serious mistakes we made is we tested a prototype, and it was around housing conditions, and it led to that house being deemed unfit for residents. So that meant that family had to find another place to stay, and the notice that the days that they had to find another place to stay were really short, less than a week. And so that was a difficult learning, because the pressure on the current rental and social housing market here in Auckland means that is a really big ask. So there was a lot of stress involved there for us and for that family, and we got around that family and tried to support them as best as we could. The learning there was actually the family found their own solution and actually moved into a better home. So the long term they were in a better place, but the learning was quite painful in terms of what we don't want to do is the balance is we don't want to put families in a more difficult situation, and we do want to push the boundaries on the staff. If we really do want to improve housing conditions for whānau, then we've really got to grapple with the whole problem, including what might happen if we really get stuck into understanding what conditions people are living in and how can we help with it. And one of those implications are people may end up with no place to stay. So you can plan for that, you can mitigate that, and it's still going to have an impact on the family if it arises. So that was hard, but we did our best to put the support we could around them, and in the end, like I say, they were resilient enough and they were smart enough to be able to, with our support, find a better place. Actually, they said if they hadn't been in the process that they had been in, they might not have had the skills or the courage to be able to do that for themselves. About this work, people would say to me, is this co-design with a little bit of Tikanga in it? Or is this a Tikanga approach using a bit of co-design? I guess it's who you're talking to, I guess it's perspective, because for me, this is just my worldview. So these are the kind of principles that guide all of my work, I might not have a framework for all of that, but this is the way I operate. So this is a Māori worldview using principles of design to create local fit for purpose solutions for whānau, where they're enabled, they're empowered to lead that. This is really relational. This is about how you empower people and whānau inside of the process, rather than which tool are you going to use for a good design outcome. That's kind of how I think about it. So I would hope what it helps people to do is just to think about how they're engaging and how they're working with whānau and how they're empowering whānau and how they're sharing power and control inside of the process and beyond the process as well. I hope that helps people to think about that. We're still thinking about it. It will always evolve. In my mind, there'll never be, this is it, the practice is complete. It should continue to evolve. Because our remit is around better economic and social outcomes for whānau here in South Auckland, what I want to think about is how the methodology is useful in empowering and building the capability of whānau here and creating local fit for purpose solutions that have been designed and then are driven by whānau. Because you can go through a design process too, and you don't necessarily need the whānau to lead it out or to carry it on. And in future maybe there'll be, I have thought about this, an iteration of design methodology that is actually tikanga Māori with wayfinding is something really interesting that resonates with me when you think about the phases of of design, and a lot of the time it's intuitive, and you kind of don't know you're there until you hit land. Yeah, so I've thought about wayfinding as a framework in terms of that kind of design methodology. I think others have thought about it too. It's got phases too, which is really, really interesting, which you can almost overlay to kind of 4 phases of design, you know, seeking, waiting, circling. It's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. Because we're grappling with some of the most complex, wicked challenges of this age, nobody knows what the next step is. Because if somebody knew it, we wouldn't have all these challenges, right? But I sometimes talk about it as a squiggle. There are lots of points in the design process where it is very unclear what is going to emerge here, and that's okay. You've got to be comfortable with that, and you've got to trust the process. Just like those tōhunga have to trust when they're circling, are they feeling, where's the tide coming from, where's the undertow, well, we're going to figure this out, we're going to be okay, but we're just going to stop and circle until we know where to go. And that's what it is in parts of the design process, and that's what it's going to be for us to think about our most challenging, complex, wicked problems. And we've got to be okay with that. And some of that's just letting go of the expert model too. We don't have to know all of the answers all of the time. And yet this is what we've been trained to think we need to do. And so sometimes you have to be brave enough to go, I don't know what's next, but this is the process. I don't know what it will look like, but this is what we're going to do.